The Assembly is back in session. Members, we are moving to business on the daily file. The second reading. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 277.
Members, moving to file item number 2. That's AB 93. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 93 by the Committee on Budget, an act relating to the Budget Act of 2015.
Members, if we'd have your attention. Members, please direct your attention to Dr. Weber. Dr. Weber, you may open on AB 93.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and members, I rise today to present to you AB 93, the 2015-2016 budget bill. This budget is a result of the work of last week's conference committee and reflects a shared vision of both the Assembly and the Senate. The budget is a $117.5 billion general fund spending plan with many highlights reflecting the state's brightening fiscal situation. First, it contains a combined reserve of over $5.6 billion and repays $2.6 billion in state debts, further improving the state's overall fiscal position. Second, it makes dramatic increases to our schools. This budget increases the funding level for K-12 education by $8.2 billion. It also includes sizable investments in early education and child development, higher education, and financial aid. It takes meaningful steps to reduce poverty with the creation of a new earned income tax credit. It reinvests in health programs by increasing provider rates, expanding access to Medi-Cal to children regardless of immigrant status, and contains many increases in public health investment. There are also many great improvements to the program, many that you care about, like programs for veterans, the arts, and seismic safety, all while building reserves and paying down debts. Members, 157 days ago, the governor submitted a budget to the legislature for our consideration, as he was required to do so by the state's constitution. Since that time, we have spent hundreds of hours at 79 hearings vetting the governor's proposal and hearing from people from across our state to craft our own legislative budget. Today, we fulfill our constitutional role to provide the governor with a balanced 2015 budget plan for his consideration. This will begin the final stage of the process of negotiating the final agreement with the governor. Since our differences with the governor are relatively minor, we should conclude this process within the coming days, well before the start of the fiscal year of July 1. Once we have reached agreement with him, we will need to return to adopt the necessary changes to this budget, as well as several trailer bills to implement the budget package. I want to first of all, as I conclude, thank the members of the committee, thank Ms. Melendez, my vice chair, Travis Allen, Bigelow, Bloom, Bonta, Campos, Chavez, Chu, Cooper, Gordon, Grove, Jones Sawyer, Kim, Lackey, McCarty, Mullins, Nazarian, Obernolte, O'Donnell, Patterson, Rodriguez, Thurman, Ting, Wilk, and Williams. I also want to thank Mr. Gomez, who served on the conference committee as an alternate. I respectfully ask for your aye vote for AB 93, the 2015-2016 budget bill.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Ms. Melendez, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will find this shocking, I'm sure, but I rise in opposition to AB 93. As a Budget Conference Committee member, I also appreciate the efforts of everyone on the committee. There were many long hours, and I know a lot of work was put into this budget. But let's face it, it's a political exercise. This is about passing a budget on time. It's not a budget bill, it's the Legislative Paycheck Protection Act. We are voting on the majority party's spending wish list today, which includes more than $1 billion in automatic spending increases. And next year's budget writers will have to address that. We don't have the money now to pay for all of the things in this budget, and we probably won't have it in the future. It also misses an opportunity to fix our schools so that every child can learn from a great teacher It fails to expedite new water projects to increase supply and provide long-term drought relief. And Californians, I think, expect more from the majority party. So it is now up to the governor to reject the revenue projections in this bill and insist on a budget that is based on more conservative, realistic numbers. We urge him, as Republicans, to say no to the majority party's program expansions and higher spending. In fact, we Republicans sent a letter to the governor on Friday urging him to not repeat the fiscal mistakes of the past by gambling on overly optimistic revenue assumptions. It's dangerous. But so as not to be a total buzzkill today, there are some good things in the budget. We have a cap on out-of-state tuition. That's a good thing. We have some new judges who hopefully will be funded. That's a good thing. We have higher education increased funding. That's a good thing, too. However, we do hope that the final budget we vote on also includes increases to funding for the developmentally disabled who have been begging for our help to get the services that they need. And the neediest among us, of course, we would like to see them get the medical and dental care that they need. We could take some of the money that members put in this budget for their pet projects, and we could put it into some of these programs and make them whole again. There's an idea. So to my Democrat colleagues, our ask to you is very simple. Give us a budget that's realistic and balanced with the governor's conservative revenue estimates. And we would ask that the governor send the majority party back to the drawing board and come back with a budget that's a little more realistic and makes more sense. For these reasons, and so many more that I will not mention, I'm going to ask for your no vote on AB 93.
Mr. Wagner, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise briefly to oppose AB 93. Our good budget conference vice chair has explained the shortcomings in AB 93 as a whole. I want to drill down for just a second into the education component, and in particular the higher education, and even within higher education, as the Assembly co-chair of the UC caucus, into the funding for the UC system. The $25 million for enrollment growth at UC that is in the budget is a good first step towards a multi-year ramping up of enrollment of California students at UC. Unfortunately, the contingency that's in there that the UCs must enroll 5,000 full-time students through 2016-17 in order to receive any of that $25 million funding is just not a realistic proposal. The UC systems previously told us that as a matter of capacity, the maximum number of additional California students they can enroll through 2016-17 would be 3,500. And this assumed that the state would provide per student funding at $10,000 for each of these new students. So under this formula, the level of funding in the conference committee report equates to 2,500 students, not the 5,000 that is required. I hope it is not a bait and switch. I hope that $25 million for enrollment growth is not pulled away when and if those unrealistic enrollment figures aren't met. The budget before us goes on to presume that UC would use non-resident tuition funds to enroll the balance of additional California students. However, the university is using and has pledged non-resident tuition for a number of academic priorities, including improving graduation rates, providing student support services, supporting middle-class financial aid grants for California students, things all of us otherwise get behind. So we want to ensure, we should all want to ensure, whatever side of the aisle we sit on, that UC can provide the same quality education for future students that we've provided in previous generations. This is especially important at a time when the UC is serving a higher portion of first-generation college-going students and the highest number of low-income students at any time in its history. This budget doesn't necessarily get us there. Now, why bring it up? We're told by the author this budget recognizes the shared priorities of the Senate and the Assembly. It's no secret it doesn't reflect the priorities of the governor. He's not entirely on board, and as mentioned, this has to come back to us. When it comes back, I certainly hope that these issues with respect to UC spending in particular, but also all of the shortcomings recognized by Ms. Melendez are in fact addressed. In the meantime, this should be a no vote, and I'm sure several of my colleagues will give you other reasons why. But we've heard from our budget chairman. This is really just to protect our paychecks. That's no way to budget for the state of California. I urge the governor, when he gets this, to veto it, send it back, and let's do it right.
Mr. Obernolte, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, for the last 6 months, I've served as a member of the Joint Budget Committee and also on the Budget Subcommittee for Transportation and Natural Resources. I can tell you from personal experience that the membership of those committees on both sides of the aisle has worked tirelessly over the past few months to craft the budget in front of us. Unfortunately, although there are many things in this budget that are worthy of support, I must rise in opposition of the budget in chief, and I'd like to take a moment to tell you why. Members, in my opinion, the two most important things to consider when we're talking about a budget are the total amount of projected revenue and the total amount of expenditures authorized. In this case, the administration proposed a budget using a relatively conservative revenue estimate from the Department of Finance. Unfortunately, the budget that we're voting on today uses a much more aggressive projection from the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is over $3 billion higher. And adding insult to injury, the revenue that is projected to come in for that $3 billion extra comes almost entirely from the personal gains portion of income taxation, which is a notoriously unreliable source of income. In fact, the Standard & Poor's bond rating agency recently issued a statement regarding California's revenue projection, and I'd like to read it to you with your permission, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
So Standard & Poor's says, the governor's proposal avoids a disproportionate reliance on windfall-like revenues from capital gains to fund ongoing commitments, thus allowing the Department of Finance to forecast the budgetary balance beyond fiscal 2016. Insofar as the forecast the DOF produces after the budget is enacted shows the same, we could raise the state's bond rating. And members, let me remind you that a raise in the state's bond rating would be worth far more to the state of California long term in terms of lower borrowing costs than the amount of money that we're arguing about today. So we've established that capital gains is not a reliable long-term source of funding. Financial prudence then would dictate that should we adopt the higher revenue estimate, we should spend that money on one-time projects. We should certainly not spend it on new programs with recurring revenue requirements in future years, since we know for a fact that that revenue is not going to be available to us in future years. In fact, even the Legislative Analyst's Office, the agency that we're depending on for this higher revenue projection, even they had a cautionary note for us here in the legislature, and I'd like to read it to you with your permission again, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
The LAO says, the legislature should tread carefully in authorizing new spending commitments, given the uncertainty surrounding revenues and the associated fiscal year outlook. So, members, in summary, if we vote today to adopt the budget in front of us, we are doing so over the recommendation of the administration, the Department of Finance, the Legislative Analyst's Office, and the Standard & Poor's bond rating agency. Colleagues, this is not the path of financial prudence. And for that reason, I urge a no vote on the budget in chief today.
Mr. Mathis, you are recognized.
Members, I rise today in opposition of the budget proposal. According to May's PPIC statewide survey, Californians are more likely to name water and drought as the most important issue, more than jobs and more than the economy. In fact, 69% of Californians say the supply of water in their part of the state is a big problem, a record high since the survey began asking the question in 2009. Yet our current drought relief efforts amount to around 1.6% of this proposed budget. Colleagues, one honest look at the devastated farms and families throughout our state would show where our lack of priorities has been. This budget spends a lot of money, and for millions of thirsty California farmers, families, and businesses, they are wondering, what do we have to show for it? Let's pass a responsible, balanced budget measure that puts the people's number one priority, water, first. I urge a no vote.
Ms. Gaines, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I unfortunately rise in opposition to AB 93 as well. This budget has several objectionable provisions that we should not support. This budget keeps funding state parks, even though they continue to ignore the 34 recommendations made by the state auditor, which I called 2 separate audits on that resulted in tens of millions of hidden money being found. To date, State Parks still has no base budgeting for individual park units, so they don't know how much money they have versus how much money they are spending. And while this budget addresses some aspects of the drought, this budget continues to ignore the critical need for water storage. The residents in my district are being asked to curtail their water usage, yet the State Water Board continues to stand by while hundreds of thousands of gallons of valuable precious water are flushed down our rivers and ultimately into the ocean to try to save fish. The Water Board should be prioritizing funds to maximize water for human consumption and human needs rather than wasting water into the ocean during this historic drought. Building new and modern water storage facilities will help California deal with water shortages in the future. I ask for a no vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines. Mr. McCarty, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of AB 93. This budget makes critical investments in our P through 16 education system, helping improve the lives of working Californians. I venture to say that this is why many of us ran for public office, for the Assembly, to reinvest in our public education system. This budget does so today. $8 billion more in Prop 98 and ongoing spending. Over 2 years, $15 billion more to invest in our Prop 98 K through 14 education system, making sure we focus on the plan to fund our local control funding formula, nearly $7 billion on that front. We provide monies for teacher preparation development, $500 million. For our public universities, those Red Sox really paid off. We're focusing over $100 million to fully fund the CSU system's enrollment request to make sure we expand access to our marquee university that serves so many Californians. As far as UC, I want to respond to the issues as far as not being able to fulfill total enrollment. You know, the Speaker put forward a plan in her service as a UC regent, providing the framework where the regents could expand out-of-state enrollment for their current students and increase revenues to make sure we can fund the priorities put forth in the regents' budget, but also make sure we can bring in another $25 million to fund enrollment growth at the 5,000 student level. So we think the plan put forward makes sense. For our community colleges, we're able to fund enrollment growth at 3%, making sure we address workforce needs. As far as workforce development, we fund a career tech program to make sure we address kids who aren't necessarily going to go to college or to high school, making sure we focus on reforming adult ed, following up with the plans and adult education. For financial aid, we're following through on our plan to increase the competitive Cal Grant Award by 16,000 slots to focus on students who are looking to go to college after their high school years. Early education, child care, and preschool. We focus on last year's budget plan and expand access by 27,000 slots for both preschool and child care, making sure we help working parents go to have a chance to go to work, but also making sure we invest in our early learners to make sure they're ready to learn when they enter kindergarten. In sum, these investments will help move California forward and reflect on our shared values, improving the lives of everyday Californians, and make sure our state is strong going forward. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. McCarty. Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I also rise in objection today to AB 93 and ask for a no vote. As many issues have been brought up earlier in the discussion today, I'd like to raise one in particular as Vice Chair of Business and Professions and Consumer Protection. I want to focus solely on the DCA, Department of Consumer Affairs, BREEZE implementation. And this is the system that runs all the data processing for the Department of Consumer Affairs. California is a leader in many things. Unfortunately, efficiency and budget management is not one of them, as proven in the state auditor's latest report on the Department of Consumer Affairs BREEZE IT system. This budget gives the BREEZE system $28 million extra this year, and that's after we've already given them over $70 million, and the original estimate in 2009 for the entire BREEZE system was $28 million. So after we've already given them nearly $50 million, twice what they've asked for to implement BREEZE, we're going to give them another $28 million this year to continue to try to fix a system that already doesn't work. As a licensee myself, it frustrates me to no end to see our licensing fees and now millions of tax dollars going to inefficiency. At a time when our constituents are counting on us to bring California back from a painful recession, we have got to be diligent in keeping state agencies running as cost-effectively as possible. And for those reasons and the reasons mentioned earlier, I ask for a no vote.
Mr. Bloom, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to rise in support of AB 93. And I simply want to say that this budget does spend a good deal of money, but it does so in a responsible way, in a thoughtful way. And if you were to have sat through the many budget hearings that the subcommittees had, that the Budget Committee had, and then the Conference Committee, I think you would have seen very close up that very thoughtful process where we move through every aspect of this budget. Now, you've heard about some areas where we have problems in the state. This is a big state. We do have issues, and sometimes we have to spend money to resolve those issues. And I think state parks is a case in point. I think the BREEZE system is a case in point. But it doesn't mean that that money is being spent without any thought being put behind it. There are plans there to improve these systems. State parks is one in particular where we've had 2 transitions in leaderships just in the time that I've been in the short time that I've been in the legislature. The plans are underway to address what is a very complicated web of issues that surround trying to account for each state park. But those plans are underway. They're under the supervision of my budget subcommittee, and they're going to happen. They're accounted for in this budget. Many, many other things as well. I urge your aye vote.
Madam Speaker, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker and members, thank you. There's just a couple of things I would say about the budget before us today. First, though, I want to thank our budget chair, Dr. Shirley Weber, our subcommittee chairs, the members of the Budget Committee, and our conferees. This was a serious effort for the people of California. You performed an incredible amount of work, and it shows in the budget that we're voting on today, a budget that pays down debt, builds reserves even more than the governor proposed in May, a budget that restores funding to our schools, as you've heard, which suffered serious deep cuts during the recession, a budget that lifts people up, especially children, who live in poverty in the 7th largest economy in the world. This budget is for Californians. A budget that improves funding for our world-class systems of higher education, as you heard, makes them more affordable, accessible, and effective for California students. We included additional money for drinking water, groundwater planning and remediation, recycled water, all being responsive to voters and trying to get Proposition 1 monies out the door responsibly. In this budget, we fund veteran services, seismic safety programs, Arts Council funding, which lends to economic activity in our communities, all areas that make California better, public safety, and all of those are areas that suffered during the recession. Members, thanks in large part to this legislature, this governor, and voters of California, our state is on firm financial footing. And that stability gives us an opportunity that has been rare in recent years to focus on what it takes to build a stronger and brighter future for the people of California. The budget we're voting on today helps us get there. It is our responsibility to take this action today. We're also having very frank and fruitful budget discussions with Governor Brown. He is part of that process with us. All those conversations come closer to concluding, and as they come closer to concluding, I'm confident they will help us get there as well. Members, my first budget votes were some of the most difficult I've ever cast as an elected official, and I know I speak for my colleagues in the class of 2010 as well. This budget is the kind of budget I came here to help enact. Today, we can once again ensure California has a responsible, balanced, and on-time budget. And even better than that, I think it's a budget we can and should be proud of. I would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dr. Weber, you may close.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and members, I want to thank my colleagues for all of their comments and obviously all of their great concerns for the state of California, for our fiscal health, and our responsibility to the people of California. Our Speaker has given us clearly the great vision of what this budget is about. It is really about California values, and we often say where you spend your money is where your heart is. And it does speak to the issues of building families and children and working with our cities and building our infrastructure. It also talks about building our schools, which are critical to the life and growth of California. So I'm really pleased and thankful to all of those who served on the committee. Despite the conversations here, there was very little division among us about our vision, our love, and our passion for the people and making sure that what we do here is representative of the state of California. With that in mind, Mr. Speaker, I ask for your aye vote for AB 93.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 The clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 53, noes 27. The conference report is adopted. Members, moving briefly back to guest introductions. Mr. Hernandez, you are recognized for your guest introduction. Members, please give Mr. Hernandez your attention.